Welcome to this session called Making Solidarity a Reality. Welcome, everyone. I'll be chairing this session. My name's Lorena, as you can see. I'm from the northwest of Spain, from Galicia. I'm gonna start introducing the speakers. I think we've got 4 speakers today. We've got Paul Figueroa from the Puerto Rico Independence Party. We've got also Sarah Glynn from the Scottish Solidarity Campaign with Kurdistan. We've got Red Debbie, I don't know if pronounced correctly, who is a political activist in the West Bank from Palestine. We've got Yaratz Stomba, if that's okay, from which is the internationalist organization of the Basque Country independence movement. So I'm going to start with Paul Figueroa. So if you to start, it's your time to do it.
Perfect. Thank you, Lorena. Thank you, Graham, and to all of the comrades for inviting me to today's conference. It's an honor to share with you and represent my country in these spaces. Like Lorena said, I'm Paul Figueroa. I was a city council candidate for San Juan, our capital, for the Puerto Rican Independence Party in these past elections. And I'm also spokesperson of the LGBT collective of the party as well. Puerto Ricans share with our Scottish comrades centuries of history in the struggle for sovereignty. Because of those centuries of sustained struggle and the sacrifices of those who came before us, in 2021, we're able to see that resistance come to fruition. I don't want to delve too far into that history, but I do find it pertinent to review, however, briefly, so we can appreciate the persistence and growth of our movement. In 1868, in a struggle known as el Grito de Lares, the first Republic of Puerto Rico was declared. This democratic pro-independence movement was led by workers and abolitionists and created for the first time a Puerto Rican national consciousness. And since then, our independence struggle has always been intersectional, radical, and our nation's moral compass. In 1898, the US military invaded Puerto Rico, and since then we have been so highly militarized that our lands and waters have been weaponized and used as an outpost for military operations in Latin America, and that occupation continues today. Along with the American military occupation has come intense persecution of leftist and pro-independence sympathizers. For years, gag laws made it illegal to wave a Puerto Rican flag or to sing patriotic tunes. Our leaders were routinely imprisoned or assassinated, even as recently as 2003. Our buildings and homes were bombed, and pro-independence sympathizers were often subject to constant monitoring by the state. These tactics naturally came with electoral consequences, and the independentistas went from being a major electoral force to a small minority. Nevertheless, the independentistas, we have always been the vanguard of politics and the gatekeepers of our Puerto Rican identity. Whenever Puerto Rican interests have been threatened, independentistas have always responded through action. Whether it be from the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party that from the 30s to the 50s led hundreds of labor strikes for the tobacco, sugarcane, and dock workers unions, to my own party, the Puerto Rican Independence Party, that in recent decades has organized alongside electrical, telephone, and teachers unions for our collective workers' rights. The Puerto Rican Nationalist Party also led armed insurrections against the US occupations in the 1950s, to again the PIP, my party that organized peaceful resistance in the late 1960s and early 2000s, where we forced the US military to abandon their bases in the islands of Vieques and Culebra. To the PIP and other independence activists who have fought and won struggles against petroleum pipelines and pollutions caused on our lands and waters by the coal industry, and also to the contributions that we and other independence movements have made in the struggle for women's and LGBTQ rights, our party being the first in the nation to have that on our platform. This trajectory demonstrates that the independentistas have always taken the side of the oppressed and understood that liberation is both radical and intersectional. Our trajectory also demonstrates that despite independentistas having been a minority, Puerto Ricans still maintain a strong sense of nationalism. This sense of nationalism has always been most present during our hardest moments, and whenever we have been most oppressed is when we have been most inclined to reaffirm and revindicate what makes us Puerto Ricans. We are in a similar moment right now in our history. The neoliberal and neocolonial economic plan here has failed. Puerto Rico has been in an economic depression since 2006, and the government, to create a false sense of security, took out debt it could not pay. The United States response was in 2016 the creation of the Promesa Law, which installed the non-elected Fiscal Control Board with supreme authority over our finances and governance. In the years since Promesa was passed, Puerto Rico has experienced a poverty rate that hovers around 50%. 1 in 3 Puerto Rican children experiences hunger. We have the highest unemployment rate in the United States. We've had the largest outmigration in a century, losing over a quarter of our population. We've experienced the closure and privatization of more than 50% of our public schools. We're living a modern colonial apartheid system with settler colonialists occupying lands without paying any taxes. But Puerto Ricans pay some of the highest contributions in the United States, and we're experiencing the greatest displacement since the first phases of colonialism after the US invasion. Just this past week, we've experienced the privatization of our energy authority, meaning our entire electric grid and 50% of our water resources are now controlled by one American company that did not even exist a year ago and is actively working right now to dismantle one of our most radical workers' unions. Given this panorama, our young people who have grown up in a generation of crisis find little hope in the current colonial system, or that under annexation to the United States, they will somehow come and save us, and are seeking new political alternatives. Out of this seemingly hopeless situation, the PIP has created a platform, Capatria Nueva, that focuses on guaranteeing socialized education and healthcare, renewable green energy, strengthening cooperatives and unions, restructuring the debt, and most importantly, fulfilling our right to self-determination and independence. The Puerto Rican people, particularly the young, responded to this message of hope and independence, and the PIP improved their electoral results by 700% this November from the last elections. I'd like to add, though, that the PIP, however, does not hold a monopoly on the independence movement, and many youth-led pro-independence, mutual aid, and resistance groups have formed, which we also support. Socialism and independence are at our best moments politically in more than a century here in Puerto Rico. I know in Scotland, support for independence has also grown exponentially, and that growth has translated into positive electoral results. So now we both can empathize and share enthusiasm over the past elections and the work that lies ahead for both of us. We're here together, two nations colonized by the world's two most consequential empires in an incredibly critical moment for us both. If we're to build on our electoral results and translate those results into independence, we must converse and organize in between elections as well. It's my hope that we can have those conversations together, not just between Puerto Rico and Scotland, but also with Palestine, who I've had the opportunity to stand in solidarity with and protest over the past few weeks, Basque, Catalonia, Wales, and all other colonized nations of the world. I do believe that there's beauty in the similarities of our struggles, and for those reasons, we must learn to struggle together. I can't think of a more appropriate time for us to come together virtually in Scotland, when this weekend Joe Biden will be meeting with Boris Johnson and Queen Elizabeth. The imperialist politicians meet together, the multinational corporations meet together, the capitalists all meet together, and for those reasons, we must come together as well. The first and most important act of international solidarity that we can do is raise awareness. Therefore, as I close, my challenge for building international solidarity today is that I ask you all not to leave without having made at least one international connection. From that connection, build a friendship based on genuine solidarity, and from there start finding ways to organize so we can build the international solidarity network necessary to achieve the liberation of all people. Thank you for your time here today. I know I've taken up a little bit more time than allowed. I look forward to listening and learning from the other comrades, and I look forward to hearing your questions later. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm excited to learn and share with all of you.
Muchas gracias, Paul. Thank you very much. We continue with Sarah Glenn, if she's there.
Yes, I was introduced as working for Scottish Solidarity for Kurdistan, or with Kurdistan. In fact, I've been so inspired by the Kurdish freedom movement that I'm now working for them full time, actually based in Strasbourg. And I know that I'm very lucky to be able to do that, to work for a solidarity movement full time. But there's lots of ways to show solidarity with other movements and with this, without being full time, of course. And I'm going to end with, we're actually having a demo in Edinburgh on Tuesday, which I'll give the details of at the end. But I wanted to actually just begin by saying why solidarity. And I think, you know, in a meeting like this, we probably all just take it for granted, but I get quite startled sometimes when people are saying, you know, why are you interested in this? You know, we've got so many problems at home. And I'm sure you've all seen that. And the answer is, of course, together we can make a difference, if not us, who. And often, if we're working with people from an oppressed country, like Kurds in Turkey, for example, actually, if they raise their voices often, they'll get arrested. They need others to amplify their voice, and of course to amplify it in other places, in other countries. But also solidarity, it's a two-way street. And every time any government gets away with clamping down on democracy, it actually encourages other countries to do the same. So, for example, when Spain really clamped down on Catalonia, Turkey was absolutely delighted because they saw that as sort of endorsing the way they were behaving towards the Kurds. And the capitalism generally has been learning from looking at countries like Russia and China that really democracy isn't all that necessary for the capitalists to do quite well. So yeah, they all learn from all the bad things that all the other countries are doing. But similarly, every democratic and positive advance in one place can help others. And I mean, what's inspired me to go and work for the Kurds is the lessons in democracy and grassroots democracy and people working together from Rojava, from the autonomous region in northern East Syria, and from the Kurdish-run municipalities in northern Turkey before those were really quashed by the Turkish regime. And so really inspired by this grassroots democracy, which we'll be talking a bit about in the democracy session. But also in campaigning against very aggressive Turkish foreign policy, that's a foreign policy that's a danger to the whole world. But you know, what they're doing is really making things a whole lot more unstable. So we're talking about supporting people who are giving us an example of and really inspiring a better world, but also supporting them in fighting people who are really countries, nations that are really dangerous for the world. And for the people that we are giving solidarity to, I mean, even knowing that there is wider solidarity out there, you know, isn't just in itself for a start a source of strength. But we need to think how we can make that solidarity more effective. So, I mean, I'm here in Strasbourg. My official job will be is really, well, it's not so much at the moment because of COVID, but it's talking to people in government, it's diplomacy. But all those government people are not going to respond without pressure from below and from the sort of movement like we saw against South African apartheid. So at the same time as we do, we won't ever stop keeping up direct pressure on our MPs, on our MSPs, on all the people that have power to pull strings. We need to grow that solidarity movement from below in order to increase that pressure and really make it felt. And we need to inform ourselves and inform others what's happening. So in the case of Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan, we tried very hard to show what's being achieved by the Kurdish movement and also all the pressures that there are to crush it. And those pressures aren't just coming from Turkey, they're coming from ruling elites everywhere who don't want to see radical democracy and socialist ideas succeed. But Turkey needs cooperation from other governments, especially because their economy is in a really bad place just now, and they can behave the way they're doing because the so-called international community, that sort of international community that's meeting in Cornwall just now, allows it to do it. But our sort of international community, our solidarity, working class, activists, the general people's solidarity international community, are not going to let them get away with it. And we've got to put demands on our governments for action and use our call for those demands to build a bigger and bigger movement. So just to talk about, just very briefly, what the demonstration on Tuesday and what's currently happening. So, well, there's so many things happening, where to start. And it's just everywhere. I write a weekly column about news on and what's been happening to the Kurds, which some of you will know, and there's never any shortage of things to write, I can tell you, and most of it is really, really worrying. So I'm working for the People's Democratic Party and Turkey, which is the sort of leftist pro-Kurdish party in Turkey. Turkey is trying to shut it down, as well as endlessly rounding up people, sending people to prison for thousands of years. And you really couldn't make these things up, and sort of crazy reasons. And lots of people get in prison just for, insulting the president, all sorts of things. So that's happening within Turkey itself. Obviously, we've seen the invasions of Turkey into northern Syria, into Rojava, and the absolutely appalling state of the areas that have been invaded, the ethnic cleansing, the destruction of the environment, the destruction of life, but basically gang rule by sort of jihadi mercenaries used by Turkey, and very deliberately getting rid of the existing population and replacing them, and Turkification. It's utterly depressing each time one reads about it. What's currently happening at the moment, which really doesn't seem to have been made it into the international press at all, is that Turkey is invading North Iraq. And you won't hear much about it because it's basically dressed up as an anti-terrorist operation against the PKK, of course. And first, I would argue, and it's not just me, this is a position that was actually taken all the way through the legal system in Belgium, and the Belgian courts agreed that the PKK should not be considered as a terrorist organization, but as a non-state actor in a war. So it's a war that's going on between the PKK and Turkey. So shouldn't really consider it as an anti-terrorist organization anyway. But anyway, the PKK have for decades been in northern Iraq, and many times Turkey's invaded. Turkey already has some 5,000 troops there and around 40 military bases in Iraq. And basically they show every intention of occupying that land permanently. And like I was describing in that brutal occupation of Afrin, they're carrying out very much a scorched earth policy of driving away the inhabitants in the villages and using what's been described as ecocide. I mean, there's been a lot of photographs going around social media of truckloads of cut timber being trucked into Turkey. Basically, they're clearing the mountains of the forests. Of the other day, they cut down literally in a day thousands of apple and pear trees. They're just, it's a scorched earth policy. And as they've done in Syria and in other places, they're using the jihadi mercenaries who are known for their brutality. And President Erdogan makes no secret of his neo-Ottoman dreams that he would like to return Turkey's borders to the pre-1923 treaty position, and that would be including Kirkuk, Mosul, Aleppo, so the whole sort of band that's the Kurdish area, but actually even going beyond that. So the Kurdish community in Scotland has called a demonstration on Tuesday at 11 o'clock in Princes Street by the National Gallery. And if any of you are around in Edinburgh and free that time, please do join us. And if you want to find out more about it and about what's been happening in Kurdistan generally, please check out our Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan Facebook page, or you could check out my regular column on Media News, which is spelled MEDYA News. I'll post I'll post it in a minute, and just get informed and get active. And yeah, find out all about the wonderful, inspiring things, but also about the danger that it's under and how we can help just do our little bit to show solidarity. And I must say, I've been really inspired actually by, I kind of boast to people, people in Scotland really know what's happening there. And, we're good, but we're going to get even better. So thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Great contribution there. Okay, so we now move to Palestine with Riot Debbie.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I'm very sorry for being late, but actually we have an emergency case. I received a very bad news from a friend that this moment the Israeli occupation shot a mother at one of the Israeli military checkpoints between Nablus and Ramallah. And we received this very bad news that she passed away now. I was following many friends' mothers were passing the checkpoints these moments, and many people called us to see if who killed was their mothers or no. Anyway, this kind of Israeli apartheid behavior become a daily practice since months in Palestine. Our recent news from my city, Nablus, in the north of West Bank, was the killing of 15 years old Palestinian boy called Muhammad Hamayel. What makes the story of Muhammad very unique, and I would really like to start with, that Muhammad reflects the Palestinian suffering under occupation, not because he passed away, not because he was killed yesterday during his participation in the non-violence weekly demonstration at Beta village, where the Israelis and the right-wing settlers decided to build a new illegal settlements. It is not the main reason, neither because he's a baby, because every day the Israeli target babies and children in the Israeli checkpoints and in the non-violence demonstrations. No, because Muhammad has a very unique story, that his grandfather, by the way, his name is Muhammad as well, Muhammad Hamayel. He was assassinated in the 70th of the last century in non-violence demonstration at the same village Beta. And his uncle in 1982, he was killed by the Israeli occupation again. And his aunt as well has been killed. Muhammad's father spent 14 years as a political prisoner in the Israeli apartheid jails. That's showing us, first of all, the real face of this apartheid system in Israel. That's showing us more that through the 3 generations, nothing has been changed in Palestine. The grandfather has been killed. The daughter and the son of the grandfather has been killed in the 70th and in the 80th. Then today, the 15 years old Muhammad, who represent the 4th generation under this apartheid in Israel, has been killed in a cold blood, where the whole international community, the whole media witness targeting our children and our non-violence activists in West Bank, in Gaza, in East Jerusalem. This is the time now to see that international solidarity should make more than slogans and should pay more than words and promises to the Palestinian people. It is the time to take real actions in order to stop 73 years of the apartheid, because in the 15th of May, we have the 73rd anniversary of occupying of 77% of our history. And these days in June, we marked the 54 years of the occupation of the rest of our historical land. We mean by that West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. Unfortunately, we still wait the international community to take real actions in order to stop this apartheid, who has been stopped by the willing of the international community in the 90s of the last century. We've seen the collapse of the apartheid system in South Africa. We've seen the end of the British, for example, occupation on India. We've seen the end of the French occupation on Algeria. But unfortunately, what we witnessed in Palestine is a full immunity and a full protection for this apartheid system, even if we try to raise our voice and to say that Palestinian people deserve to have freedom, dignity, self-determination, we accused as anti-Semitic in Europe, in Britain, and in all over the world. We do believe that unless you as people, you the 99% of the power, you're the real power of the change, if we don't put our hand all together, and if we don't go forward towards ending this occupation, and if we don't say things in the right way, what we have in Palestine is not a conflict, because there is no two sides. There is no two equal sides, I mean. There is oppressor and oppressed. There is occupation and there is occupied people. There is victims and there is murders. We should say things in the right way. And we do believe that Britain, especially Britain, carry more than one responsibility, not just the political responsibility, but even the moral one and the legal one, because our suffering in Palestine has started because of the Balfour Declaration, where Mr. Balfour did not have any right to give somebody else's land to the Jewish people. We do believe that in order to have stability, in order to have development in the whole region, it is the time in order to put an end to the Israeli occupation on our lands. As you all know, that tomorrow a new government will be formed, and the right-wing leader of Israel, who led Israel in the more than 1 decade in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, will leave the presidential house tomorrow. But for us in Palestine, we have nothing to be optimistic for, simply because who will replace Netanyahu believe that Netanyahu is not radical enough and not right-winger enough to rule Israel. They do believe that, for example, the current prime minister in Israel, Lapid, he do believe that Palestinian prisoners should be killed. He do believe that Palestinian people should be transferred. He doesn't deal with the Palestinian territories occupied in 1967 as occupied territories. He do believe that Palestinians should be transferred to Jordan and all of this land called Israel. Under such leadership in Israel, under this coalition in Israel, we don't see any opportunity for win-win situation without interfering from international community, interfering from people. Today, I seen the pictures from London in front of the Israeli embassy, and it was really great pictures. We really see the changing in the public opinion in UK, in America, the participation of this very great demonstration against this occupation. Britain, but I tell you something. All of these things is great. We receive your messages with a lot of appreciation, a lot of hope. But believe me, this is the time for a direct measures. Because Mr. Netanyahu, Mr. Lapid, all of these right-wing leaders in Israel, they don't care if you tell them hundreds times what you are is wrong, moral, illegal. He just believe or will be influenced if you touch his pocket. and if you make a real change. So it is the time to boycott all the, to adopt BDS as a strategy. And BDS has nothing to say against Jewish people, because a lot of people saying that BDS, you know what is BDS, right? Okay, BDS is the boycott and sanctions and diverse movement, not just in Palestine, but all over the world. We're saying it is very fruitful and effective because it has been tested in India, it has been tested in Algeria against France, it has been tested in South Africa against the apartheid system, and it is the time to adopt it all over the world in order to make the day of freedom in Palestine and closer. And again, I would like to say that belong to anti-Semitic when we say BDS, simply because we never call anybody to boycott a Jewish restaurant or company in Scotland, in Dundee, or in Edinburgh, or anywhere else. We just say that in order to end this occupation, you should show solidarity. One and great measures for this freedom is to make this occupation costly one. By the way, comrades, Palestinian people under occupation and the occupation of our lands is the very only zero cost occupation all over the world. It is not just zero costs, even it is fruitful one for the occupation, because they invest in our lands, they steal our natural resources, they take our soil, and they make industrial and agricultural projects on our lands in Jordan Valley and in 1967 lands, and they asking us to be thankful for them because they offer us some job opportunities. In my point of view, this is a slavery, because when you steal my land and you take me as employee in my land and you ask me to be thankful to you in the end of the day because you're giving me some cents because of my efforts, this is called modern slavery. I don't see any difference between this and between the slavery in the ancient ages. It is the time for you as youth, for Scotland, which we highly appreciate, and we do believe that we have a real and part of them in Scotland. I would like to say that it is the time to push your governments, to push your people, more believer in the media, in the university neighborhoods, to say we want to have a win-win situation for this conflict by having a positive deal where we can have a Palestinian people with the self-determination, where we can see a real Palestinian state on the 1967 lands with East Jerusalem as its capital according to the UN resolutions and human rights principles. And I think it is not impossible. We don't ask for impossible, and we don't have demands. Many times people asking us, what are your demands as Palestinians? I always say we have no demands, we have rights. We want commitment in international law, and we accept the UN resolutions as a common ground, because in any conflict, people reading from different books, Israeli people reading from their own books, their narrative, their religion, their history, their lies, their propaganda, and in Palestine we have our background and our narrative as well. So in order to find a solution, this solution should be a common book, and we think the common book should be UN resolutions, human rights principles, and human rights rights for the Palestinian people. I don't know if you've seen human rights recent report about Palestine, which was super clear and direct. And he said very clearly, what's happening in Palestinian territories is apartheid, has to be ended now, and it is the time for the freedom of the Palestinian people. I don't want to be longer than this, but I would like to tell you that the best you can do to raise your voice, to use social media, and you were the real change, by the way, under the recent aggression on Gaza, because your contribution on the social media made the difference. You shown that there is another face and another story. You shown that there is people under attack in Gaza Strip. I call you to continue your support. And I invite you all to come to Palestine. I would like to say that I work at Seeds Association for Development. We host international volunteers and we have accommodation as well. If any of you would like to come, you are most welcome. We wish to see you very soon in Free Palestine. And I would really again like to thank you all for hosting me today, for giving me this opportunity to speak in behalf of my people and in behalf of the Palestinian people. I would like to say that our struggle for freedom and justice is part of the struggle of the humanity, the struggle of the Kurdish people, the struggle of the people all over the world for self-determination and for freedom. Hand in hand with you, we can make that change. We trust on you. We don't trust on the governments, because we have an experience of 73 years continuous promising from different governments. We received Big Zero, we received apartheid, we received more victims. But with you, we do believe that the fruit will be freedom, dignity, and self-determination. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you. Amazing to have a Palestinian speaker here today to explain what the Israeli state is really doing to the Gaza campaigners and to the people in general.
Lori, I just seen a question about my expectations from Biden administration.
Yes, I think
okay, super.
We have time for questions there.
Okay, super. I'm with you.
Okay, so we now move to the Basque country with the representative from the internationalist organization Askapena.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be invited to this meeting. Well, I don't know if you know what Askapena is, but maybe it should be nice if I could explain a little bit what Askapena is. Askapena is an internationalist organization of the Basque country, Euskal Herria, and it's in its ideological basis are the independence of Euskal Herria in a socialist and feminist society. Well, Askapena was born in 1987 as part of the Basque Liberation Movement. The Basque Liberation Movement began in 1958 with the appearance of ETA, and there began the first liberation struggle for the Basque country. Well, in the history of the Basque liberation struggle, the internationalism has been always been there in the ideological basis, but it appeared in the form of Askapena in 1987, just because it was needed, and it was thought that just following the saying of Che of building 1, 2, 3, 1,000 Vietnams, it was needed to create a Vietnam here in the Basque country, just because one of the main ideas of the internationalism in Askapena, in the Basque internationalism, is that we believe that every country, every people, when free itself from the capitalism, from the patriarchy, just make the capitalism weaker. So it's the best contribution that people can make to all the peoples all over the world. We need to be stronger, because if we are stronger, the capitalism is stronger. So just feeling that it's the same structure that oppresses every people that wants to be free in the world, making it weaker makes us stronger. So, but the situation, I think, as you know, that in the Basque Country has changed from a decade ago, more or less, with the disappearance of ETA and the disappearance of the armed struggle. Well, till then, it was, I think, I could say, a classical liberation movement with an armed structure, just acting as a vanguard, more or less, and a movement all around, just conformed by the political parties, different social movements. We call popular movement to this movement that just fitted this liberation strategy. And why? Because we think that the popular movement is the movement conformed and created from the working class people, the working class of our people. The Basque working class was in the popular movement, and the Basque working class was the one that wanted to liberate itself from the Spanish and French state that are just capitalist tools to oppress peoples, as the Basque Country, Galicia, Andalusia, Catalonian countries, etc. So it was our area for the struggle, and it was our responsibility to free this part of the land from the capitalism as a contribution to the liberation of the peoples of all around the world. So taking in this idea, now that the Basque liberation movement, we can say that has disappeared, okay? It's not more a Basque liberation movement. It doesn't mean that we don't think that it has to be created, okay? And we are on it. But nowadays we have a reality that some parts of this liberation movement are involved in the, we could say, social democrat ideas, for example, and the social spectrum, social and political spectrum to the left of this social democrat area, okay, is like atomized, totally totally separated, and even with clashes with different groups. So we have a real risk for the atomization of this possible movement, and it's a need of every revolutionary here in the Basque Country just to try to consolidate and cohesionate this movement. So we are on it. And Azkapena, as an internationalist organization, now is trying to create or to build some bases of the Basque internationalism in the ideas that I have mentioned before, of the struggle of the freedom, for the freedom of the peoples is the struggle against the capitalism, and it's the same struggle in all over the world. Well, Azkapena in his history has looked at the beginnings to Latin America with Nicaragua, El Salvador, etc. A lot of people went there as brigadiers, etc. And there began the idea to send people on brigades to different peoples just to know the struggles all around the world as a way to learn about different liberation processes and to bring those lessons to the Basque Country and just to try to improve the ideas of the peoples here in the Basque Country. At the same time, these brigades build bridges between people, contacts, relations. So it's a way to create this network, also needed, just because any people alone can be free if it's not in contact with the others. It's one of the bases of the internationalism. So, but just go by, and from Latin America we start looking at Middle East, we start looking at Kurdistan, we start looking at Palestinian people, and then the view of the internationalism goes by and spread the idea of the internationalism And we start thinking that more than the first idea of this romantic idea of internationalism to support the peoples, it's a big responsibility in us, in our own countries, in our own peoples, to fight as internationalism with no need to go there, because maybe the struggle begins here in our own country. And that's why these last 10 years, Azkapena is just thinking and building the idea and a network in some way against the European Union, that we think that it's the capitalist tool that oppresses the European peoples, Scottish, Irish, Basque, Andalusian, Països Catalans, doesn't mind. And it's needed a network between the peoples in the European Union and even in the European continent as a brotherhood to struggle against this capitalist structure. So once we have said that, it's important to what can we do as internationalists to improve in that way. We have heard here different realities of different parts of the world: Palestinian, Kurdistan, Puerto Rican, even the Basque Country. And one of the questions was that, what can we do from Scotland to support the Basque Country? The answer is always the same. What you can do is to free your own land as a working class people, to free your land from the capitalism, and that's the best way to help another people. And in this way, for example, in the Basque Country, the comrade riot has told us the situation in Palestine. Here, for example, now CAF, it's a company that is building a train that will link Jerusalem to the Zionist colonies in Palestine. And here we have started, or we started months ago, a campaign against the building of this train, because it's a responsibility as the Basque working people to stop this train. It's the best contribution we can do for the Palestinian brothers and sisters to stop the building of this train that will get deepened in the colonization of the Palestinian people, this train that will get deepened in the Zionist idea. So it's a responsibility. For example, another example is 2 weeks ago, we were doing demonstrations supporting the peoples of Bashur and the trial against the HDP in Kurdistan, and just signaling the weapon industry here in the Basque Country, because the Basque bourgeoisie gets rich oppressing the peoples on the world. And we as internationalists has this responsibility, because when a kid is killed in Palestine, one of us is killed in Palestine. Because one woman is imprisoned in Kurdistan, one of us is in prison. And when we are struggling here, every of you are struggling here. And it's important for us to spread this idea and to try to convince the people to get deep in this idea, because we think and we believe really that it's the real solution of the peoples. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks to you. It's really encouraging to hear stories and different ideas from these nations and peoples, different backgrounds coming together to this conference. Okay, so we now move to a general discussion on the international solidarity and sharing your camera. And also you can post on the chat the questions you want to ask. We've got now Colm, for example. Do you want to come in?
Right. I just wanted to ask to thank all the speakers. I found it really interesting. It's really good to hear directly from people who are either on the front line of the struggles or who, like Sarah, who's participating, who's got such knowledge about the Kurdish movement as well. I had a question for Paul in Puerto Rico. Paul, just to ask you, I know that a number of different parties or movements have emerged on the radical left in Puerto Rico in recent years, all of whom I understand, broadly speaking, are supportive of independence. I just wanted to ask, how is cooperation between the different movements from the point of view of the Puerto Rican Independence Party? Is there good cooperation? Is it a positive sign, or is there a lot of division?
Yeah.
Or what?
Thank you for that question. I think we need to be hesitant when we talk about radical leftism in emerging parties. The PEEP is 75 years old in October. We've had a great electoral result in these elections. We've been a socialist party since 1971. There's a new emerging party that claims to have progressive values, right, but has never actually endorsed socialism outright. So I think it's very important to be able to understand, who are the people that are putting out an unapologetically socialist platform. And so far, we're the only ones that are doing that on the electoral front. However, like I said, we do have radical leftist groups such as Se Acabaron la Promesa, which is a radical socialist group organizing around independence. A lot of those groups have been forming. The PEEP is always working collaboration with them. I was in a protest yesterday against austerity in the public university, and there were many, many leftist collectives there that we all shared in the organizing with. And the May 1st demonstrations we organized with, and even with other political parties that maybe don't identify as socialists but share progressive values with us. We do have a lot of cooperation in terms of the bills that we present and co-sponsor in the Puerto Rican legislature. It's also really important to add too that in Puerto Rico, the colonial government does not allow us to form electoral coalitions. So there is no, even though we can organize together and cooperate together, there is no way for us to join politically, which is something that BEEP has proposed as a constitutional amendment. We've been proposing that since 2019. So there, we do collaborate together. However, a lot of the limitations imposed by the government really prohibit us from joining together in a more integrated way.
Okay, thank you, Colm, for your question, and thank you, Paul, for answering that. Seamus, do you want to come in next?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lorena, and thank you to everybody for absolutely incredible contributions. I realize that we're all kind of in this strange and to some this kind of contradictory position of simultaneously waging a national struggle at this while also waging a class struggle. And to some people who maybe aren't engaged, even to socialists, and sometimes especially to socialists, we have the experience in Scotland of being accused of kind of a chauvinism, of national chauvinism, or of in some way undermining the class struggle through our participation in our own various national struggles. And my question to, I guess, all of the participants here, none in particular, is how do you, in your own context, as kind of existing in these peripheries of empire, how do you express the way that you synthesize that contradiction? How in your own practice and in your own context do you view those two struggles as complementary or indeed as part of the same struggle? Thank you very much.
I wanted to say a couple of things. So firstly, I'm sure that so many of us here have sort of begun conversations. I'm not a nationalist, which is what so many people supporting the Yes movement will say. I mean, we're all internationalists. I think it was beautifully put by our comrade from the Basque country about how what we do where we are helps other places. And it is about, you know, just a freedom and trying to improve things. I don't, but I wanted to speak particularly, well, a couple of things. One is I work for a Kurdish freedom movement, which isn't actually a nationalist movement. I mean, they're talking about, because they don't accept the idea of state boundaries. And I think a lot of us have problems with the idea of the whole state system, but we live in a world that's divided into states, and we recognize that in such a world, you know, if we want freedom to do things the best way possible, we cannot be underneath the Westminster government, who will be controlling our foreign policy and controlling our currency or whatever. So it is the freedom to do things better. And just on a very practical front, I just wanted to give just a wee anecdote of one of our experiences campaigning in Dundee. And I mean, Dundee's a great place to campaign because it's got that one central square, and that's where everything happens. So it's a really good place to speak to people, to meet people. And we were having, I think it was at the time of the attacks on Afrin, but it was a Kurdish demonstration anyway. And of course, I mean, you know, Dundee, it's the home of the heckler. You always get shouted at, and people were saying, you know, why are you out there campaigning for people in Rojava? Well, they wouldn't have said that, but for people in another part of the world, when there's so many problems here, there's all these unemployed people, there's, you know, why aren't you dealing with the problems here? And we could honestly say to them, if you, all the people here who are campaigning, you will also find us on another day outside the job centre, because we're actually all involved in the Scottish Unemployed Workers Network. We're actually bringing the struggles together. We're campaigning for both. So I think it is as well tying things together and showing how, you know, helping in one part of the world helps the other is really important, and not just focusing down.
Aratz is saying he wants to come in to answer his question. So
It's just to say, Argala, one of the founders of ETA, said that the national liberation struggle and the social liberation struggle is the two faces of the same coin. What does it mean? It means that when your working class people liberates itself, it takes the form of national liberation struggle in this case. Why? Because it's a people oppressed by two capitalist states that use the oppression of the peoples to get rich, the bourgeoisie that controls these states. So when you liberate your country, your people as itself, you automatically are liberating it as a working class people. Why? Because the Basque bourgeoisie that exists, of course, is related to the Spanish and the French bourgeoisie. They have the same interests, so that's why they share the same structure. So when the people say, of course, they say a lot of time to us that we can be chauvinist or nationalist, and the answer is very very easy. Sometimes it's like we are working class people, and the only thing we want we want is to control our own future, to self-determinate ourselves as a people, but not as a people under a flag. It's under a flag that symbols the struggle of the working class people, that people that wants to get liberated from the bourgeoisie. That's that. I think that's the answer.
Paul Figueroa, it's your turn now.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think something we struggle with a lot, and I know one of the comrades put it in the chat, is that nationalism is kind of a dirty word right now. But I think when you talk about nationalism from the perspective of an oppressed nation, it's not the same kind of nationalism that you get from an empire like the UK or the United States, right? I was talking about how in Puerto Rico, we're currently living under an apartheid system called Ley 2022, which is facilitating gentrification which is facilitating settler colonialists, and the people that are most actively displaced are the poor and working class people, right? So in reaffirming our culture and reaffirming our Puerto Rican identity, that no, this is ours, this is yours, there's something beautiful here worth saving. I think reaffirming our identity in that way, there's nothing, that is a positive nationalism. There's a good nationalism in that, right? In Puerto Rico, we're going through a process where a lot of these settler colonialists are pushing English only. And then asking, you know, this is an island that's spoken Spanish for 500 years. Why should we speak English? Why don't you learn Spanish, right? That this is our language. It's a beautiful language. So I think there's a way that nationalism can be channeled in a powerful way. I think a great example from Puerto Rico is Casa Pueblo. Casa Pueblo is an environmentalist organization that exists in the mountains in an area called the Juntas. And the government tried exploiting many mountains in that region for mining. And what Casa Pueblo did is they organized a cultural initiative to educate people through popular education on the dangers of mining and what that would mean for the poor and working class in the mountains. And through that cultural initiative, we were able to defeat the mines. And now all of that area is a nature reserve. And we were able to do it by reaffirming our culture that, no, this is our land and there's something beautiful here, there's something worth preserving. So I think when we focus on nationalism in that sense and what it means to be a nationalist in the perspective of an oppressed person, I think that just naturally lends itself to working class solidarity, to being in intersectional, an intersectional struggle for liberation of all people. In Puerto Rico, the independence movement has always been connected to women's rights, to LGBT rights, because our liberation at the end of the day is collective. So that's my answer to your question. I hope you found it useful.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks to Shay for asking the question to our speakers. We're running out of time, so I think we have time. Last question. So if someone wants to speak or to say anything, Alan Boylan, for example, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Raed, does he see any difference with Biden's administration vis-a-vis Trump's for the Palestinian people?
Thank you, Alan, very much for this question. Actually, this is a very good question. Of course, there is some differences between Biden administration and Trump's administration. Trump's was the worst of the worst. Trump was a full partner of the aggression against our people. Trump was part of the problem. Trump was partner of the apartheid. Even or his administration, it was more racism than the right-wing leadership in Israel. So what we witnessed during Trump's administration, a coup in all of the American policies during the previous 25 years. But it doesn't mean that we have a very high expectation on the Biden's administration. It is very clear, as we say in Palestine, that we want to be free from the jail instead of improving our life inside the jail. So what I expect personally from Biden's administration is to give more cash to Palestinian people, to resume the international, to the humanitarian and educational aids. I think he could bring back the Palestinian case to the agenda and to the table. But if you ask me if he has anything clear on his agenda towards having a Palestinian independent state and a self-determination to the Palestinian people, my answer would be no, because we have to remember very well that Biden was the friend of Israel in the Congress and then in the White House as vice president. So I don't think that Biden has a real answer for the question of the occupation in his hand. I don't see he has any willing to push Israel to end its occupation. I do believe that he will go back to the very classical American foreign policy towards Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which is moderate the conflict, manage the instead of ending the suffering of the people since more than 73 years. So I see differences, but I don't see any real changing to have a Palestinian freedom from Biden.
Thank you, Alan, for your question, and thank you, Red, for solving that. Okay, well, I think we don't have time for anything else because the skills sessions are going to begin in 5 minutes. So much. Thank you, everyone, for for coming to this session. I hope this has been great. I think we've seen great contributions from every speaker. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.